So, I originally wanted to do this as an edited video, but you're getting this lecture style instead because I worked too hard on the writing and left myself with an empty tank last night. So without further ado, let's start. We're about a week into the 2XKO Alpha Lab, the tail end basically of this frenetic full throttle first taste of Riot's newly established turf in the FGC. Before I go deeper in the subject of this video, I will fully acknowledge, as Riot stressed again and again, that they meant it about being an alpha. While extremely well polished, this is still only a rough sketch of what they ultimately want the game to be. And a lot of the issues and complaints we've seen bubbling up over social media, Reddit, Discord, and everywhere else are likely to be addressed before their eventual public beta, much less the actual 1.0 release. Also, yeah, you know the drill. Like, follow, subscribe, ring the bell. It's right down there in the corner over here. Do so, yeah. Anyhow, back to the lecture. All that said, this is also therefore the correct time to provide as much feedback and analysis as possible in the hopes of producing a version of 2XKO that is as maximally enjoyable as possible for the audience as large as possible. And as much as you can expect a large audience for any fighting game, much less a traditional hardcore 2D tag fighter, and this, make no mistake, is a hardcore fighter. They might have adopted what we now dub modern controls in the style of Grand Blue Versus or Street Fighter 6, but Riot's attempts to simplify the controls has, I would argue, inadvertently produced the most complex knowledge check in the modern FGC. I do not mean this from a subjective personal sense, or even reading testimonials of other players, veterans, and newcomers alike. Complaints from subjective experience are notoriously error-prone in the FGC in the first place. The high levels of nuance between skill levels in the genre is inherently what makes it so fun to watch as you observe the likes of Tokido or Justin Wong dig into layers of the game you might have had hundreds of hours in, but still lack the requisite mastery to see it as they do. So opinions of whether or not a grappler is strong, a zoner is too hard to deal with, or if corner pressure is too extreme is something that often ebbs and flows in a fighting game's lifetime, even if not a patch has been implemented between each different consensus. Rather, I come to my conclusion through simply developing a special inputs heat map between 2XKO and Street Fighter 6. This behind me is what Street Fighter 6's controls look like when laid out in relation to each other, specifically for Juri and Ryu. And this is what 2XKO's heat map looks like for Yasuo and Darius. Note that this isn't a map of the simplified modern inputs for Street Fighter 6. Let me go ahead and switch back to that. But these are based on the classical executions, like the 236s, the 214s, the 623s. Bolded inputs are all quarter circle types, underlined ones are the harder Dragon Punch inputs. But even in classic control situation, quarter circle or Dragon Punch type inputs are largely going to be context agnostic, tied primarily to the right hand button input and only secondarily to the left hand directional inputs. Not to mention, this chart can be further reduced to types of special inputs without losing too much context. If we assume that the light, medium, heavy progression can be collapsed to basically fireball types or Tatsu type inputs, as with overdriven versions, the heat map is further reduced by up to a third of the displayed moves, excepting Juri's differentiating overdrives for her special combo Oreka. But the most important takeaway from this chart is that the primary consideration for special inputs in Street Fighter is focused on one hand, and overwhelmingly on one of 6 buttons, with the type of move sharing common trends even between disparate playstyles based on the punch or kick button used. This, self-evidently, is not true for 2XKO. While Riot's fighter comparatively lacks 2 button input considerations outside of the universal system mechanics like push, block, parry, or burst, they instead have 2 other types of complexities. One, a greater dependence on context-important ambidextrous inputs. Back S1 and back S2, for instance, share no properties, nor do they necessarily have strong relations with their downward or forward equivalents on the same button. With the case-by-case exceptions, actually more the exception that proves the rule, rather than as like exception to it. For example, in Yasuo's case, Airborne Galeblade has a mini Gatling with S1 and S2. It does have an internal logic of its own, but it's not one shared with anybody else on the cast. As example, Brahms' hard knockdown from the air is actually on S1 instead of S2. Furthermore, that mini Gatling is emblematic of the biggest complexity issue with 2xKO, and that damn near everything leads to a context-dependent special combo. Darius, for instance, by far the most simplified character in the game, is still a very, very complex one. And this is only made starkly more apparent through him because of his lack of special moves in relation to a deliberately high execution character like Yasuo. Decimate and Apprehend may be single button context agnostic inputs, but each branches into multiple buttons based on the next attack you input, with the property of each follow-up unrelated to how the equivalent button on other special buttons records might work. There is nothing like an intuitive Hadoken progression where you're increasing distance, speed, damage, or follow-up potential with the next button over, right? It's not clear how one button is related to the other button, in short. Rather, the challenge in learning a 2xKO character is how much of the burden of knowledge you're able to get over before you can start to really play the character as intended and to apply that knowledge ambidextrously. And that is inherently hardcore design. In contrast to where you think might be going with this, though, I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing. A game's longevity is based on how many layers of execution and nuance you can peel back as you gain more mastery of the character over time. And let's be honest, when you hit that Yasuo Echo combination, it's a massive, massive high. But it may be an argument that the newbie-friendly design principle all this simplified input was meant for may not have entirely succeeded. To be clear, dropping quarter circle and dragon punch inputs for a supposedly easier button system does in fact successfully make the game a lot more accessible to those with various neurological or physical issues. But the trade-off is that they've made a game with a steeper memory-based barrier to entry just to engage at the game's starting level of play. Now, I do think there may be a couple ways around this, both large and small. The biggest and most obvious and probably the most drastic way to deal with this is to retool 2xKO's controls for a more intuitive progression, matching that of others. Especially, not Street Fighter 6 actually, but stealing design principles from their Pierce and Ground move versus Rising as the most directly comparable template. While Rising's Direction Special Normal combo is much more divisibly demanding, they keep to the light, medium, heavy progression that makes it easier to remember what does what and how, right? I would actually prefer that this doesn't happen though, for a couple of reasons. Partially, I just don't want to wait for this. I don't want this game to be delayed another goddamn year while they completely rework the controls. That's kind of selfish on my part. But partially, I'm also just not wholly convinced that dumbing down 2xKO's controls is entirely necessary. Instead, and alternatively, I would like to see Riot give us something like a Pulse Plus. Now, if you know what the Pulse system is, the Pulse Fuse, it's basically the auto combo system. Once you do get a hit, all you need to do is start mashing your button and it'll go through. You'll get a whole combo, a whole punch that way. But you only get that one combo. And it doesn't actually teach you how to do combos either. It only shows you visually what it looks like. And I've been long a proponent of the idea that fighting games are part RPS and part rhythm game. At the most simplified level, you're basically playing RPS in the neutral to see who has the right to play Beat Mania for a few seconds to squeeze out extra damage. Pulse Fuse is there because learning the rhythm game portion of the fighter is hard. Input sequence and timing is entirely invisible, and the inability to engage meaningfully with the most expressive part of the game is inherently frustrating if you're a new player. Especially since you don't know how to start developing the essence for a combo, how to start adjusting your timing in the lab to find how the combo links together and how it works. So what if instead we simply just straight up gave them a rhythm game to play and to actually teach them how to do it? Like with the Pulse Fuse, this would drastically limit the scope to just a basic grounded and airborne combo. But unlike with Pulse Fuse, a Pulse Plus system would basically have them actually do the inputs for it to happen. It's just that the inputs are shown directly to them with a timing indicator to point out when to do it and in what order. We can also further this by implementing Pulse Plus Plus or Advanced Pulse, allowing the trainee to designate a specific custom combo to focus on, restricting them, just like with Pulse Fuse, to only these selected combo routes, forcing them to use only that route to do meaningful damage in PvP. Now, what largely differentiates this from combo trials in lab is that this is all happening live in match. While combo trials are great for solo lab work, and any veteran of the genre knows that there's a sharp execution gap between lab combos and actually doing it against a human player. Trying to steal, especially one that's trying to actively steal their turn away from you. An advanced pulse system bridges the gap between the two, and by virtue of repetition, input visualization does a much better job of aiding memorization of inputs than anything currently available in the game, or even in the genre at large. Now, all that's left to do then is to also rename S1 and S2 into something like runes and glyphs in reference to old League of Legends rune usage, so that shorthand notation is less of a goddamn nightmare. It's already hard enough for a newbie to remember that 2 equals down and 5 equals not moving. Do you really want to make them further confused with the difference between 2S2 and 22S2? No, you don't. Obviously not. Now, ultimately, I think there's going to be a level of irreducibility to 2XKO's complexity on the basis that attack fighters are inherently supposed to be wild as hell. But I think that only makes it all the more important that there at least be better training aids if a systematic overhaul of control design principles is a bridge too far. All we can do now is hope that they show some progression towards those ends with the upcoming beta, which I will play, come hell or high water, because whatever else you can say, this game is very rewarding and very fun, and I am sad that the Alpha Lab is ending soon. Again, thank you all for watching. Follow me on social media, like, subscribe, hit that bell, and I'll see you on stream next time.